Audubon Society, a longtime supporter and friend of mine with the Key West Tropical Forest Botanical Garden. He is recognized as the Florida Keys Birdman. Bobby, most of you all know that, right? Thank you so much for being here. I'll turn it over to Mark.
All right, thanks. Thanks for coming out, everyone. I've never called myself Birdman, just to be clear, but you know, I'm okay with it. Just don't call me Marky, that's the whole thing on my poker game. They call me that to get under my skin on a regular basis. Anyway, so I'm going to talk today about flamingos and the Florida Keys and Florida in general, and a little bit of a history. So everyone knows kind of Florida is synonymous with flamingos. They're on our grapefruit labels, gift packages, decorative spoons, glasses, bells that you ring. I don't know why you would have a bell to ring. This is my favorite one, the Key Largo one, which I think it's more of a cormorant, just painted pink, but it's supposed to be a flamingo. It's sold as a flamingo. Eastern Airlines, Amtrak. I mean, Florida has been pimping flamingos forever. This ashtray that I really like was a 7-mile bridge and a flamingo. Toothpick holder. This is like 3 minutes of eBay. And Florida Lottery, of course, has a flamingo on it. And it's also a popular Fantasy Fest costume. And several of these people are biologists, so yeah, so Florida, so the question is like, Florida sells flamingos all the time, but hardly anybody ever sees flamingos. And it's kind of a little bit of a long and a little bit twisted history. Everyone should know this guy is John James Audubon, or Jean-Jacques Audubon, kind of the namesake of the Audubon Society. And he came to the Keys in 1832. He came when Key West was pretty nascent. This is his painting of the the great white heron, which is currently considered a color morph or subspecies. But I've got inside dirt that it's probably going to be changing to a species soon, back to full species status. This kind of gets bounced around because it's very closely related to the great blue heron. But one of the cool things about this painting, which he painted here, because great white herons only exist in the Keys, is you can see what Key West looked like a little bit in 1832 when he came here. He kind of hid a lot of those things in the back of his paintings. So when he was here, he spent time in Key West, he spent time in Indian Key. And when he was up at Indian Key, he saw a flock of what he said was 500 flamingos up there flying around. But he tried to shoot them, but they were too far out, and every time they get close, they take off because they're birds and they fly. So he kept trying, this is what Indian Key looks like kind of currently. So he ended up painting this one from a specimen collected in Cuba and stored in a rum barrel to preserve it. So he saw that, and like he's not the only report of flamingos down here. There's also this guy named Gustavus Werdeman. This is I think the 1860 report of the annual report of the Smithsonian Institute. But they published this letter he wrote from down here, from Indian Key actually, where he went out with a local guide, and the local guide caught 50 flamingos to bring into Key West for meat. So they were pretty abundant. And then there was also a guy named, I think his name was Judge A.R. Lowe, and he spotted 50 flamingo nests once on Sugarloaf Key. And I just put this photo in just to show you how weird a flamingo nest is. Flamingos tend to spend their time in generally what they prefer is hypersaline shallow ponds. It's where they get their shrimp, all the other stuff they eat, which keeps them pink. So there are lots of historic reports of flamingos in the Keys. And then this happened. Not necessarily this lady specifically, but this trend of women's hats with feathers on them made feathers more valuable per ounce than gold. And so in Florida, we had this, toward the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, we had plume hunters. And this is kind of an old story, probably a lot of you guys heard of it. They basically wiped out a ton of birds in Florida. There were no more flamingos, and there were no flamingos in Florida for a long time because of the plume hunters. So they took that out, and it just decimated wading bird stocks all over the country, or all over the country, but especially in Florida. Those numbers are still coming back now, 125 years later. They were knocked down pretty hard. This is another, it's hard to find photos of the plume hunters, but this is a contraband catch of one of their things, but they were just going you know, when herons are on nests, they're just sitting there, or wading birds. They would just go in and gun them down, take their feathers, ship them to New York, which is the basis for the Audubon Society beginning, was to fight this trend. The Audubon hired this guy, Guy Bradley, literal guy, to be the first warden for the Florida Keys to try and stop the slaughter of wading birds in the Everglades. And Guy Bradley was actually murdered for his efforts. They tried his killer in Key West and let him go free back in the day. But so Audubon actually died, Guy Bradley actually died trying to save these birds. So after that, basically, the common belief was flamingos are wiped out in Florida. So we'll get back to that. This is kind of their natural range, which I was really surprised to start to hit Galapagos. I didn't know that until I found this graphic, and then I'm like, hey, Galapagos. So you can kind of see what the range, I've seen them in Cuba, I've seen them in Colombia, a couple places like that. The one thing that's not really shown well on the map is the Bahamas, because in Great Anagua, there's a huge colony of them. And kind of during the millenary trade time, I think they were down to like 1,000 flamingos in the Bahamas. But through the help of the National Audubon Society, they basically have, over the years, kind of brought the population back, and I think it's now about 60,000 birds are estimated. But the vast bulk of them are Great Anagua, which is also a Morton salt factory, because they live in like these salt plains. So basically, after the flamingos wiped out, they were kind of brought into places like Hialeah Park, where they've had a flock there for, I guess, close to 100 years. And at first they kept their wings clipped, but now they're just basically domesticated to eat birds. So they don't really have a lot of inspiration to leave because they get free food and get to hang out and they have a flock. But there are also places like Gatorland, which I don't know if it's been to Gatorland, a crazy place in Orlando, with 12-foot alligators behind chicken wire. So I kind of see the little kids running around with the gators eyeing them, But they had them there. They had them all sorts of places, but basically they're all zoo pets. They're a place where you go and feed the flamingos.
Did they bring in the American flamingos?
Well, no, they were wiped out in the States. They probably brought them in. I'm not totally sure where they came from, but all the ones you see now are captive bred, which also means they're less inclined to fly away. But I think they probably brought them in from the Bahamas or...
But not from Africa. That was my question.
No, different species.
Yes, I know, but
yeah.
And that's what I was saying.
Yeah, these are all American flamingo. Just
Okay.
when I say flamingo, today I'm just talking about the American flamingo, which is a species, sometimes called the Caribbean flamingo, but it's its own species. So then we get to this guy, Robert Porter Allen, who kind of, he started the Audubon Science Center in Tavernier, which has been established since about a 100-year anniversary, I think we're looking at. And he'd done a lot to save the whooping crane, which was down to, I think, like 16 birds. So he was kind of part of the captive breeding of getting them back. And we're still struggling with that. But he was the head of the Science Center, kind of like more buff and adventurous than you usually expect the bird guys to look. But good guy, but he knew a lot about birds. He was actually on To Tell the Truth once. You can find it on YouTube if you ever want to see an episode of To Tell the Truth with Robert Porter Allen. But he literally wrote the book on flamingos. That's like a 367-page monograph about flamingos that he wrote for the Audubon Society. And everything was known about them. And what he put out there in this thing was that flamingos were wiped out in Florida. Any flamingo you see is an escapee from somewhere like Hialeah or another zoo. And so that was kind of taken as gospel by Robert Porter Allen and by Sandy Sprunt, probably the two Sandy Sprunts that followed him, because there were two Alexander Sprunts who worked at the Tavernier Science Center, father and son. And just nobody questioned this for decades. People would see flamingos, but birders would be like, oh, they don't count because, they're escapees from a zoo. Because they're wiped out in Florida. They're all escaped from this flock. The one. This is also the same flock that's in the beginning of the Miami Bay intro, which I videoed the other day, but I forgot to put on. Then 2002 happened, and basically a bird with a band on its leg from Mexico was spotted in the Everglades. And they're like, okay, so this is kind of proof that birds are flying in from other places. And I think another second bird was found from Mexico a couple years later. This is kind of around the time I became a birder and I first started seeing them. You could go down to Flamingo in Everglades National Park, and they would be like, half-mile out, but it would be a 4-foot tall pink bird, so you could kind of see them. And then there was also this place, which is called STA2, which is a stormwater treatment area up near West Palm Beach. And for a while, in the late 2000s and early 2010s, they had this flock there that kept building and building, and it built up to 147 birds, which is, too many to be escaped from Hialeah. And for some reason they stopped coming, but most likely these birds just flew over from the Bahamas, because if you look over there, the map, West Palm is pretty close to the Bahamas. You can almost swim it. And then in 2015 this happened. This is a bird named Conky. And this is on the Key West, Naval Air Station Key West. And Conky flew in with 2 other birds, and the Navy doesn't like having big tall birds next to their runways, because they could make jets crash and millions of dollars in death and all that stuff. So they were like, okay, we gotta get them out of here. So they chased off 2 of them, and Conky wouldn't leave. But at the same time, people from Zoo Miami were looking for a flamingo to put a satellite tracker on. So they all kind of coordinated. The Navy said basically, come get this bird or we're going to shoot it. Because, Navy can do that, and it was kind of near the airplanes. So they kind of came down, they surveyed the situation. That's Tom Sweets. That's a guy named Dr. No, that's actually that's Dr. Stephen Albright. They surveyed it, and then Tom Sweets, who many of you might know from the local rehab, wildlife rescue, he's the guy who saves most of the birds in Key West. Tom laid in the grass for 4 hours with a net gun, waiting for the flamingo to get close enough, because it had to be definitely close enough, because you didn't want to scare it off, or have it just stay in the pond and have it get shot and stuff. So Frank Risley and Stephen, blank on his name. But anyways, they kind of tried to keep flushing it down so Tom could catch it, and finally got close enough. Tom fired the net gun, landed on the bird. You got to get there quick because they can get out of it. So Tom gets up to go get it, and then he falls down because his legs are asleep. So basically, they were worried, like Tom just couldn't move, but they did catch the bird. So they caught Conky, named him Conky. You can kind of see him right there. These are not my photographs, by the way. These are from, I think these are Zoo Miami shot most of these. This is the rehab folks. That's actually, since it's Zoo Miami and they have a flock of flamingos on property, they actually have a flamingo crate. Hey, Tony.
Hey, Mark.
So they have a flamingo crate at the rate, a proper built flamingo crate. So they Ellen knows, they had them at the rehab for a couple days, kind of fatten them up a little bit. What? Yeah, Ellen got bit by the concrete. So they shipped them up to Miami, and they put a satellite tracker on them. And then they get ready to release them, and the state of Florida is like, you can't release them, they're an exotic species. They've been extirpated for Florida, they're not a native species. So it took some wrangling, but they did eventually finally release Conky, and it got a little complicated. They released them, and then he got liver fluke, so he got sick, so they recaptured him, and then they rehabbed him, and then they released him again with a satellite tracker on. But after that, he did pretty well. This is actually, I want to show this. This is the current Florida Fish and Wildlife website, which, if you can see, it lists them as native. There's actually a highlighted sentence on this next one where they say, FWC considers flamingos native to Florida, and this is not a new determination. They've been acting like they never treated flamingos as a non-native species. But I'm married to a reporter, Nancy Klingener, who used to work for WLRN, and reporters are crafty. She used the Wayback Machine, found the old webpage where the flamingo is listed as a non-native species. Just to kind of prove that they did kind of give it this short shrift for a while, which meant if it's a non-native species, it doesn't have protections. It's not protected under the Migratory Bird Treaties Act a lot of times. So yeah, that's just kind of proof that they kind of try to hide their tracks. Non-natives, greater flamingo. So they did finally take out Conky out of the Everglades and they released them. But then you can see there's a band on one leg, and then the little thing with the transmitter going down, that's a GPS transmitter, which every 2 days, it takes a reading every 4 times a day, and then every 2 days uploads it to a satellite. So they had data from this thing for close to 2 years. This is Conky joined up with other flamingos. You can kind of see the transmitter on his legs right here. So he made flamingo friends, which is nice.
This is in the Everglades?
This is yeah, it's up in Florida Bay, but it's that whole kind of zone. And these are these little yellow dots here are all Conky's like movements about the Everglades. And they thought Conky was going to go back to Mexico or something like that, and he just never left. He stayed in the glades. But the weird thing is, like, there's a lot of birders out there, a lot of people. It's a 4-foot tall pink bird. Nobody saw it. It was hardly ever reported, but they have all these satellite images of the bird moving around the glades, which is really crucial data. And I guess, you know, towards the end, I guess the uploads got less and less frequent. And then I think they said the last one they had was like 2 days after Hurricane Irma. So the birds survived the storm, but that was their last transmission. They do think they had a sighting of Conky a couple months later. So they had that evidence, but they were like, this is problematic that the state does not believe this is a native species. So these guys got together and did some really crafty research. There's a thing, I think they're called OOLIS, O-O-L-I-S. They collect bird eggs. It was a kind of a big hobby in the 1800s and early 1900s. So there's all these people who had these eggs they collected in the Keys in these collections around the country. So they went and kind of researched all those and documented them. They documented all the sightings from like newspapers and reports like Audubon and Gustavus Werdeman and Judge Lowe, and they kind of put it all together and said, listen, flamingos have always been here. They're kind of coming back. We should kind of try and help them out. And the state has kind of declined to do a lot of further protection of them, but they've at least listed them as native species. So yeah, so that's kind of progress. And you know, Conky wasn't the only one. They get seen. They've kind of been getting seen more and more frequently. I mean, I'd say before I had a camera, I probably saw them 3 or 4 times. There was one that hung out in the pond in front of Topinos for like a month. They hung out on Boca Chica. You'd see them around. And this is one I shot in, I think, May of 2015. This is up on Grassy Key. I got to see this one. Kind of fun the way they run across the water to start to run to get in the air. This one was New Year's Day 2021. That was kind of cool. And then this is Christina Wilson. She's worked for mosquito control. She doesn't anymore. She lives up in Key Largo now. But in, I guess it was June of 2020. I had my slides out of order. June of 2020, she spotted 6 of them out on out on Big Torch, which is kind of great. So a lot of people got to see those birds, get decent pictures of them. They're nice, you know. I'm always kind of just amazed by the way their necks work and the fact that their necks work. And musculature, and it's just crazy. It's like they attach a snake to a bird, sort of. But then, I was gonna say, I got to show, this is Tony Falcone, who's one of the founders of Fantasy Fest, who's sitting back there. But I got to show Tony a flamingo, which I thought was pretty cool. I'm his partner, Escal. That was great. I mean, you look at birds, Tony.
I love it.
Yeah, okay, hold on. That's a note to self. Well, this is kind of like what they look like when they move. It's kind of cool. It's a moment of zen.
What do they eat?
Shrimp and other kind of aquatic stuff.
The shrimp give them their color?
Yeah, and they've got really powerful tongues. So they're actually filter feeders. So when their head goes upside down like a golf club, and then they just kind of swish water in and out of their mouth, and they have like kind of little barbs on their tongue that kind of catch stuff and throw it back into their throat. That's how they feed. You can kind of see him moving his head, chomping it out a little bit. So.
Is that your, did you take that from?
Yeah, I shot that. But you know, it's just the fact that there's a creature with a head that works like that is always just kind of amazing. Maybe an elephant's trunk is a better metaphor, but like the elephant's head was at the end of the trunk. So yeah. And then one showed up on West Summerlin Key in probably 21 or 22. getting fuzzy now, it's COVID time. But that was kind of, this one hung out in like deep water for days, which was kind of cool, very fun thing to take pictures of. I mean, they're just such weird flyers. It almost looks like they could fly in either direction, backwards or forward. Yeah, so. And what happened in 2023? Oh yeah, 2023. Hurricane Idalia happened. This is last fall. Hurricane Idalia happened. It kind of brushed up between Cuba and the Yucatan. And at that time, apparently a lot of flamingos were migrating. Because what happened was in the days and weeks after, there were 11 at Key Island in North Carolina, 2 in South Carolina, 2 in Virginia, 3 in Alabama, 5 in Tennessee, 1 in Kentucky, 2 in Ohio, 2 in Pennsylvania, and then also just Georgia, Alabama, Texas, and Louisiana. They were everywhere. And then in Florida, we had 100 flamingos, at least 100 individuals seen in Florida, which was just crazy. Yeah, and here's we'll go on the map. This kind of shows all the places in Florida where these things were seen and reported. And yeah, so it was everywhere. This is an eBird map. I don't know if you people are familiar with eBird. That's where people report bird sightings. And this is what the keys were, so it's a little hard to see probably for you guys, but boom, 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 boom. These are all the sightings in the keys in the kind of that of fall of last year. It was kind of crazy how many there were. And then this happened on Grassy Key, which is, what's that, 8 birds? Yeah, it's 8 birds. Small little flock that happened during that period of time. But if you look at the one on the far right, this side, that one, oh, I put an arrow in. I forgot I did that. You can see he's got a band on his leg. And this bird was banded in the Yucatan. This bird was actually captive raised or captive bred, released in the wild in the Yucatan. Because there's a breeding program down there trying to strengthen up the numbers of flamingos in Mexico. And so I think these guys, they don't, well, this one told us exactly where it's from, but the other 100 were just kind of taking educated guesses at. But if you look at all the circumstantial evidence, it seems like, but this is also possibly a way for Florida to get repopulated with flamingos.
So did these stay around? Somehow?
We'll get there.
Okay.
I want to go back to Fantasy Fest though. What I appreciate about these guys when they did their costume is they all have leg bands. Because when I saw them, I'm like, where's your leg bands? And they're all like, it was pretty funny. So yeah, and this is the Grassy Key shot again. So there's kind of a whole bunch of photographers up in the Middle Keys who kind of started following the flocks around and tracking them and everything. And someone say who? I have it in my notes. Get them organized. Just a quote I meant to read from Jerry Lorenz, who's the director of the Tavernier Science Center now. He said, the overwhelming record of evidence support our conclusion that flamingos are part of our native fauna. So, that's cool. We're getting there. Yeah, so this is Mary Stella, who also used to work at Dolphin Research Center. But there's a bunch of photographers who were just going around all fall. They even had a bat signal. They would text each other like I think it was a flamingo on a cloud. When the flamingos were around so they could all go get pictures. This is Jack Loudon took these. I think that's Christy Killam took that. Did she teach her class already?
Yep.
Okay. She just taught a class here. And that was Colleen Fuller, I think. Yeah. So anyway, so there's all these kind of photographers out there just documenting. I mean, part of I think why we're seeing more and more of them is we have so much better information. Like, there's a lot of people out there with cameras. 15, 20 years ago, you didn't have this. The internet, social media, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of great how much information gets shared these days. And so, I got a little flamingo FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
So I went up, this one, there were like 3 of them who hung out every afternoon on Ohio Key for a while. I don't know if you've been to Ohio Key, so it's kind of like a bowl, so it's kind of like a flamingo stadium. You can watch them. That was kind of cool. And 2024, these are the sightings. Mostly, if you notice, up here in the glades, down at Flamingo, more than no sightings in the Keys that I've seen on eBird. But if you look, this one guy, you're probably gonna read it, but a guy named Will Johnson had 63 flamingos in one place.
Wow.
So they seem to be congregating down here again.
And that was this year?
That was February 11th.
Wow.
So a month ago. But I mean, I think probably most of the flamingos are going to filter down to the Everglades, whether they stay in the Everglades or go to Cuba or go back to the Yucatan or Mexico, any of that stuff. I'm not totally sure what's going to happen with that. Nobody knows. But it'd be kind of cool if they kind of stayed and maybe started reestablishing a population, because, I mean, humans 100 years seems like a long time if you're talking on an evolutionary scale or populating a landscape. That stuff takes time to come back. So I think these guys are kind of refilling their good ecological niche in Florida. So I hope they kind of stay and that continues. Yeah. And so this photo, this is one of the storms out of the pier, and the woman in yellow is named Mary Huska. You can see her over there. You can see her there. So I met her because I took these photos. Because I was out there playing around with the camera, and they were sticking their heads into a giant wave and getting knocked around. It's kind of fun. But anyway, so February 17th, I got an email or a message on Facebook from Mary saying, "Hey, there's flamingos out in your Mikey." Or not Mikey, Mulkey, sorry, Mulkey. And that's a photo. And I got it like late afternoon. I forget if I was writing or what, but couldn't get out there that day. Next day, a storm came. So I went out the day after, even though there were like 4-foot seas and my boat is very splashy. And I got very cold. But I went around looking for this bird and I did not find it. But I think, they're out there. They're going to keep showing up in the Keys. So I think if people are out there, they communicate, pretty much everyone can get a chance to see a flamingo down there, which is kind of great. And I think that's my talk. I guess it is. I thought I had slides at the end there. So yeah, so if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Do they have any natural enemies in the wild?
Us.
Yeah.
Us and habitat loss. I mean, habitat loss is, we kind of act like it isn't us, but it is. And I don't think there's a lot of predators for flamingos, like maybe down in Central America. It could be like jaguars or civets, or I don't know.
What about pythons?
What?
Pythons.
Well, I don't think a python is going to get them out in the water. If they build nests, who knows what would happen with the eggs? I mean, there's a thing like there's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of escaped reptiles in the glades, non-native reptiles. And basically, I think small mammals are down 90% of their population right now because of that. So I don't know, how that would shake out. I don't know. I mean, would a python go into a salt pond and chase down eggs? I'm not totally sure.
What is the state's thinking about not protecting flamingos?
My personal take on this is not necessarily substantiated by anything my gut feeling. It's a pain in the ass. I mean, every time they have a new species on the endangered species list or species they have to protect, it's budget, it's staff, it's effort. So I think, nobody really wants, for bureaucratic reasons, I think people don't necessarily want to add protections for a lot of animals, especially this is Florida.
All of the flamingos that flew off into Ohio and everywhere, I read an article that said that they were strong fires and they'd fly back, but do you know what happens to them all?
Nobody knows.
Nobody
I mean, when they get spotted, it's like, it's possible the ones that were spotted in Ohio were the ones that were spotted in Pennsylvania, but they're not sure of that. And also, the lesson of Tonky is a 4-foot tall pink bird can still sneak around unseen. I mean, it's true. It's, what we miss out there versus what we see.
So we can believe that they're safe.
Yeah, we don't know otherwise.
Right.
And and my theory is they're all filtering down. So Florida, they're still spread out, and there's other habitats and things like that. So, yeah.
What's the average lifespan of
That I don't know. I could look it up, but